Okay, well, hello there, boy beasts, girl beasts, and non binary beasts. Good to see you all. Nice to have you with me. I am Tad. It is 7 p.m. Sunday evening here in Toy Town. No, here in Northern California near the ocean. And it's been a nice day so far. It's a nice day now. Cats are momentarily quiescent. The dog will not start barking until the pizza arrives, so I have at least a little while before that. And otherwise, life is okay. So, hope that is true for you too, wherever you may happen to be in this wide world of ours. And thank you for joining me. Or if you did not join me and you're watching this later on YouTube or here on the actual social media channel, then thank you for joining me anyway, after the fact. A belated joining is just as good, and God knows we all have to time shift these days to get everything done, because the modern world is so darn easy to deal with. Anyway, I'm not going to start my old guy complaining. Not really, I'm not. Anyway, so here we are. Had a nice reading last night, at least in the sense that nothing tragic happened and I got to read a long chunk. I will continue with that today, and I'll tell you about what we're reading in just a moment. Let me think. Anything else that I need to deliver unto you? No, got back out of bed today after not feeling very good yesterday with various kind of head cold and inflammatory stuff. So got some work done on the polish for the Ordinary Farm 3, the heirs of Ordinary Farm. That's HEIRS, if the time should ever come when you are looking for the book. And what else? Yeah, just worked on various things, thought about things. I'm in my strange way, even though I haven't started writing The Splintered Sun yet, although that's going to be my next project probably after I get back from tripping around in Germany at the end of this month. But I realized I'd done enough planning on it that really I just need to stop planning and start working on it. But interestingly enough, because I was in that phase of time between lying down and going to sleep, which usually lasts anywhere from 10 minutes to 40 minutes with me, I began thinking of well, if this is going to be a series of short novels and I have most of the first one figured out, what's going to happen in the second one? It's so easy to avoid doing anything that you don't want to do, including going to sleep, when you're writing books, and especially when you're writing the kind of books that I am, where you get to make stuff up. So I spent my last half an hour before sleep last night already thinking about the second book of the Flans Crows books, even though I have not even started, except in mentally and writing outlines and stuff. I've not even started the first one, which, as I have already mentioned, will be called The Splintered Sun. So that's what's going on the work front. I also was thinking about some other projects as well, but they're all extremely vague at the moment, and what's the point? I always write faster than I come up with new ideas. I always write more slowly, or at least finish these ideas more slowly than it takes me to come up with them. In fact, I kind of have to hold myself back sometimes from thinking too much about other projects I could do, because there's a limited amount of time, and a limited amount of time for work and writing does take time. That's one of the reasons that I'm going to try and write a few shorter books, which doesn't mean I'm never going to write other long ones again, but it does mean I'm going to try and write some shorter books just so I can crank through some ideas a bit faster, because I've got several books on the back burners now that I'm beginning to wonder whether I will ever find time to write them. And since some of them are more dear to me personally than necessarily have a preset audience for them, it's even more important that I not let them push out of the way the things that actually make a living for us and our family. But I also like to think, I would like to think that the people who like my other books that I wouldn't write anything that they probably wouldn't enjoy in some shape or form. So I'm also anxious, as always, to expose people to other kinds of things. That's why I wrote the Otherland books. That's why I wrote War of the Flowers. That's why I wrote the Bobby Dollar books, because I have lots of different kinds of ideas. And it's just a question of finding time to flesh them out and write them. Anyway, so before I get started, let me check in and see who has showed up. Hello, it's Ivan, and Ivan remembered, but I also remembered Ivan. Thank you. Ivan remembered that I asked him to remind me about the sign of the tree. And to be honest with you, I was going to actually do a little sketch of the sign of the tree, and then show you the physical gesture that it means in the book when it says so-and-so made the sign of the tree on his breast or in the air or whatever. But I didn't have a decent felt pen, and anything I would have used would have been really hard to see on the camera. So I will just tell you that the sign of the tree looks more or less like a trident, but without sharp points. In other words, it's kind of a U shape and with a longer stem going down the middle, but all three of the points are just the ends of lines. They are not sharp points like a trident. And let me see if I can show you. The thing itself goes like this. It's a two-part gesture. You make the two branches. Oops, sorry, it's hard to do this backwards. You make the two branches of the tree with your fingers, like this or like this, and then you draw. Yeah, it's really hard to do this backwards. And then you draw the hands through it. So it goes like this, bump, bump. Okay, so you're making that basically trident sign, which is supposed to look like the holy tree on which Osiris the Adon was martyred, according to the Adonite religion. So either one or two fingers to make it's hard to do, again, backwards. One or two fingers to make the two branches, and that's this, like I said, hard to show you, but that's that part. And then two fingers two fingers straight down. So bump, bump. Okay. So now that has been explained. I should have practiced first. I keep forgetting that this thing is flip-flopped around like the opposite of a mirror. So that that part of the room over there in real life is actually over there, sort of. It's hard to explain. Anyway, but it's not a mirror. If it was a mirror, that closet there would be on this side, if that makes sense. I think. No, wait. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is exactly why you don't want to get involved in this kind of nonsense, because you can fool yourself and confuse everybody. That definitely, though, is how the sign of the tree is made. Ignore everything else. Ignore the backward, forward, sideways, left, right thing. Sign of the tree, gesture for the branches, gesture for the stem or the trunk. And that also makes the middle branch. So there's three branches and a trunk. Anyway, all right, so now I'm going to go, now that I have fulfilled that request from my friend Ivan, I am going to go check in and see who has popped in so far and made themselves known. You don't have to ever post anything, but that's the only way at this point that I know who has actually showed up, is by the people who've made comments and where it shows up on the Facebook page. Anyway, so I see James is here. Hello, James. Good to see you, buddy. Medardo, mi amigo Medardo is here. Ivan, who of course I just made the sign of the tree for. Winter, checking in from New Zealand. Emily, good to see you. Becca, a pleasure as always. Claudia, same. Chris, Fab, there he is. Thank you, sir. Kristen, one of our most faithful auditors, I guess would be a better word. I know Kristen's also a reader of mine, but an auditor when it comes to me reading out loud. Tim Speckens, hello, Tim. My friend Jeremy, hello, Jeremy, good to see you. Jeremy just recently got accepted into a really cool writing conference, and I'm very proud for him. So good job, Jeremy. Barban is here. Isaac is here. Kelly, Kenrick, hello. Ray Weatherford, Susan Shamblin, Christy Sanders, Alexandra Lirop or Lyrop. I'm still not sure how that's pronounced. I'll call it Lirop for now. And the ubiquitous and almost famous One More. One More. I don't know who that one more is, but it's somebody who commented, and of course I can never see the comments. I only see like 5 comments at a time. Go figure. I don't understand any of it. So, with no further ado, since I think I've covered all the things that I wanted to cover, and I don't really have anything else to say, and sometime soon there will be food arriving, and then the dog will start barking upstairs, and everybody will stop and be amused by that, I'm sure, including me while I'm reading. I will start reading. So, we are in the middle of a chapter, and what has happened is this. We are following the Queen's Hand of Norn or Hikedaya soldiers and operatives, I guess, basically, who are on a secret mission for the Queen, which among other things, now is taking them up into the mountain of Irmsheim with the directive to capture a dragon, a living dragon. So they have been climbing in the heights, and besides well, now 4, because one of them died, but besides the 4 Norns, there is also Jarnulf, who is a mortal and who hates the Norns, but is pretending to be a queen's huntsman, so that he can accompany them for reasons we don't quite know yet. One of the Norns is, of course, Nezeru, who is the daughter of Vieki and the mortal woman Soja. And there's also the giant Gogamgar, who is just what it sounds like, a giant, and one of the biggest, or maybe the biggest giant there has ever been. As they are climbing up the mountain, Gogamgar was ahead of them and disappeared, and it turned out that part of the path had collapsed, and the giant had slid down the mountain and been stopped by a collection of various things that had fallen out of the hillside. As Jarnulf had been sent to go get him, because he is considered disposable and dispensable by Mako, the leader of the Queen's Hand, Jarnulf discovered the withered mummy, I guess, as you get in very cold, dry areas, the withered mummy of a very large, very long dead dragon. During the course of it, he discovered that even dried and decades, if not centuries old, the dragon's blood still burned. He got some on his glove, and it burned through his glove and burned his finger as well. So Jarnulf saved a little bit of this stuff, this dragon's blood, with the idea that if nothing else, he could maybe sell it to a mage or spell worker of some kind, make a little money off of it. Meanwhile, they all got back up onto the path again, and as they were getting ready to leave, because obviously a dead dragon was no use to them, Nezeru spotted a track in the snow near where they were, and this was a dragon's track, and a smaller dragon's track than the monster's corpse mummy that they had found below, but also on new snow, and they had realized that there might be a live dragon somewhere in the area. So that's what's happening at the moment. I will have a sip and then I will continue reading. Okay. Mako kept them hunting far into evening, until the mountain had become a death trap of wind, mist, flying ice, and nearly invisible precipices. They found a few more tracks before blowing whiteness covered them, all made by what seemed to be the same creature, the edges of the prints sharp enough to suggest they had been made in the last day or two. At last, the Talons made camp in a sheltered spot a few hundred steps above the path where they had found the second track. A Queen's Talon is a more official and more important and powerful kind of Queen's Hand. So they are all Talons, that, including Nezeru, they have been essentially promoted. It's kind of like being SEAL Team 6 or something like that. Anyway, at last the Talons made camp in a sheltered spot a few hundred steps above the path where they had found the second track. Nezeru wrapped herself in her cloak, choosing a spot near Jarnulf, not because of any softness in her heart toward him, but because she did not want to be near Mako and Keme. Quite separate from the dishonor of it, she was disgusted that they had considered killing the mortal while he still might be useful to achieve the queen's will. We could search this mountainside for days and not find anything, even if the dragon is here, said Jarnolf. We should set a trap. Why must I hear your voice, mortal? Mako demanded. This task was given to me by the queen herself. You are nothing. Jarnolf's mouth set in a tight line, but he said no more. In truth, what the mortal says makes some sense, Chieftain Mako, said Saumeji. Our time here is limited by our supplies, and Mako whirled and lashed out so quickly that for a moment Nezeru thought he had slit Saumeji's throat, but he had only grasped the singer's neck, his long white fingers pressing deeply into the flesh. One more word from you, and it will be the last you ever speak, Spellwright, Mako hissed. I do not care that you are Akinabi's favorite. Did you not hear me? I was chosen by the queen herself, and nobody else will suffer as I will suffer if we fail. He turned on Nezeru, who had not spoken or moved. Do you doubt me, half-blood? Before we left Nakiga to retrieve Hakatri's bones from their resting place, I was shown what my fate would be if I came back without them, or if I failed the Great Mother in any way. Jarnolf took a sudden breath behind her. Nezeru guessed it was the first time the mortal had heard about what they had done on the Island of the Bones before they met him. I was taken down into the cold, slow halls, Mako continued. Yes, Singer, I see you have heard of that place, although I doubt much that you have seen it. But I did, and that is where I will be taken again if we fail, whether the fault is mine or not, and where I will be made to suffer as you cannot imagine. Every cut, every burn, every blow there feels as though it lasts 1,000 years. Mako roughly pushed Saumeji away from him so that he almost fell over. Outside their shelter, the world had gone white with flying snow, and the wind sounded like the voice of something hungry. No more arguments from any of you. I will decide what we do and how we do it, and I will kill without hesitation anyone who threatens our task. Nobody spoke again for a long time. Nezeru listened to the wind groaning and shrieking around the great rock-studded mass of Jinyahadwa and wished she had been less ambitious. For the first time, it had become clear that even this deadly quest might be less dangerous than her companions, and especially her leader. An hour had passed in silence. Father once told me that to hunt something you must know it, but to catch something you must become it, said Jarnolf. He did not say it loudly, but everyone heard him. Mako snapped a glance at him, then looked away, but Saumeji straightened up as if he had heard his name called. But it is not possible to know dragons, the singer pronounced. It is no common beast, like a cow or sheep, or even a rare but fearsome one, like a lion. What do you mean? Asked Nezeru. Dragons did not grow in these lands of their own accord. As the other beasts of the field, they came here with our ancestors from the garden. I have never heard such a thing, she said. The failure of your education does not make what I say any less true, Saumeji chided her. In fact, like the changeling Tanukadaya, dragons were... He stopped suddenly, as if someone had signaled to him to be quiet, though no one had. Mako was talking with Keme, and despite his earlier anger, did not appear to be listening. I have a tongue that is sometimes hard to govern, Saumeji said to no one in particular. Forgive my foolishness. Nezeru felt certain he had been about to say something important, but she could not guess what it might have been. She looked at Jarnolf, who only shook his head, but so subtly that she doubted anyone else saw. Next section. As Jarnolf knew well, once the Norns set their minds to a thing, they were extremely thorough and as patient as water eroding stone. Day after day they continued to hunt the mountain for the dragon's slot until they had found enough tracks to discern what seemed to be a regular path. "The greatest worms are all female," Mako said, as they considered their next step. "The drakes are smaller and come to the females only to mate. By its small track, this must be such a wandering drake. Perhaps something in the scent of the dead queen dragon called to him, or perhaps he was born here on this mountain and lives here still. Perhaps the dead queen was his mother. In any case, we must find a spot he often passes over, and there make our trap." "So now you agree we need a trap?" Jarnolf asked, sourly amused. As he expected, the chieftain ignored him, but Saumeji was not so reserved. "We must take this dragon alive, mortal. It is the blood of a living dragon our queen desires." "Alive? But even if its track tells us that this is a smaller beast than the dead one, it is still far larger than any of us, even the giant," Jarnolf said. "Have any of you hunted a dragon?" "Silence," said Mako. "We are the queen's talons. We will do whatever must be done." They chose a wide, flat plateau on what seemed to be the creature's regular route of passage. Jarnolf guessed that Mako meant to dig a pit, but there was far more rock than soil, and as Nezaru quietly pointed out, they were not even certain how large their quarry was, only the size of its feet. "What about a springe?" asked Jarnolf. "Some of these trees, could we bend them down, would—" "You are a fool, mortal," Mako said. "Even with bait confusing the scent, the beast would know we were close by and never go near it." Instead, after careful sampling of the wind over the course of an hour or two, Mako set Jarnolf and the rest at points around the chosen spot, none closer than 100 paces, each placed behind something, a stone or a copse of trees that could keep them hidden. Each of the hunters also held a coil of rope with a slipping noose at one end. "When I give the word," Mako said, "you will catch the beast by the neck or foot with your rope. The other end you must hold tightly, not letting go at any cost, until you have secured the loose end around something strong, a large tree or rock." "What if it is the kind that spits fire?" Nezaru asked. "There are not many of those," Saumeji said. Mako hardly seemed to hear him. "Then we will be burned up, and the queen will send another hand to redeem our failure." Jarnolf said nothing. He had learned what the chieftain thought of questions, but as he watched Kemme bait their trap with the haunch of a goat they had killed many days before, he wondered how Mako thought 4 or 5 of them could wrestle down any full-grown dragon, even with the considerable help of Go-Gamgar. It was nowhere near the first time since he had joined the Norn company that he had feared for his life, but Jarnolf could not help wondering whether, this time, he had pushed his luck farther than it would stretch. The giant had his massive axe and his own great coil of rope, but because Mako said his stench would make the dragon fearful, he had been dispatched to a spot not just downwind, but far away. Go-Gamgar's exile made Jarnolf restless and concerned. Mako might not care if most of them were killed by an angry monster before the giant joined the game, but as one of the weaker playing pieces on Mako's shent board, Jarnolf felt differently. Preparations made, they settled into a long, cold time of waiting. It was on the cusp of morning, with the sun's light beginning to warm the sky along the eastern rim of the world, brightening it from impenetrable violet to deep blue, when Jarnolf saw the giant up on the mountainside raise his arm. At first he thought he must be mistaken, that it had been just another curl of the blowing snow he had mistaken for signals several times already. Jarnolf's head was heavy, and his eyes were dry, and he had long since decided that there was no creature more stupid in all of Ostenard than an ex-slave who would throw his fate in with the doings of his former masters. But after he blinked several times, and even rubbed at his eyes with the rough sleeve of his jacket, the smear of white high above him on the slope continued to look like a hairy white arm raised in warning. Jarnolf's heart sped, and he began to move in slow, squirming movements, trying to get the blood back into his limbs and feeling back into his fingers. He peered slit-eyed at the dragon through the murk of blowing snow and the chill mist that clung to the slope. He peered slit-eyed at the dragon path through the murk of blowing snow and the chill mist that clung to the slope. At first he could see nothing, but after what seemed an achingly long time, he finally saw movement on the northern side of the slope. What made it was nearly impossible to discern because it was the same color as the snow and ice over which it crawled, but he could see by the shadow of its movement and occasional puffs of snow that it was long and low to the ground. Now Jarnolf's heart began to beat swiftly indeed. He couldn't make out its exact shape, but he could see that the moving whiteness must be something like 10 or 12 paces long from head to tail tip, bigger than one of the monstrous cockandrills his father had told him lived in the southern swamps, and at least bigger than one of the monstrous cockandrills that father had told him lived in the southern swamps, and at least 2 or 3 times even Gogamgar's weight. Jarnolf had fought giants and other unnatural creatures, but almost never by choice, and the sheer folly of trying to capture a dragon, even a small one, suddenly struck him with the force of a blow. I'm only here because of my ridiculous, swollen pride, because of an oath I made that nobody but myself and God heard, and I'll likely die here on this God-forsaken peak, fighting beside the very Hikedaya monsters I am sworn to destroy. He said a prayer, then another, asking his blessed Adon to take pity on a believer far from home. Nobody else would, that was certain. If he died here, even the half-blood would soon forget about him, though there was no guarantee she would survive either. All of them, even the giant, seemed completely expendable to their chieftain. The queen of the Norns would be satisfied as long as one of them survived to bring the dragon's blood to her, and Mako planned to be that one. Jarnolf's hatred of Queen Otuku, which he had done his best to keep buried during his time journeying with her talons, suddenly blazed up again. Heartless, ancient bitch, he thought. Murderer, she-demon. My dear God, if I am spared death today, I promise I will fulfill that oath I made so many years ago, when I was little more than a boy. I understand the task you have given me and how these cruel Norns will help me fulfill it. I will see the Queen of Treachery dead by my own hand. But if he did not join in to help the rest, Jarnolf doubted he would ever make it back down the mountain. And if he fled for his life this moment, Mako would make a point of chasing him down and killing him. No, not just a point, but a gleeful exercise. Jarnolf wrapped his hands around the rope the blue cavern weavers had made, silently touched his sword hilt to make sure it slid easily in its scabbard, and waited. As the white thing drew closer to the spot where the goat haunch lay, Jarnolf could see more of it, and it was not what he had expected. Not exactly. He had never seen a living dragon, but from Drake lore he had heard over the years, he had supposed that it would be longer and thinner, like a snake with legs. Instead, it seemed to have a more rounded shape. Its tail was short and blunt, as was its snout. Could it be something else? He wondered. God alone knew what other horrors might lurk here at the edge of the world. In any case, killing such a thing would be difficult enough, Trying to capture it alive now seemed like the grossest folly imaginable. The wind eased for a moment, and the flurrying snow began to settle. Jarnov could suddenly see clearly. He could no longer doubt it was a dragon of some sort. The long, toothy jaws and reptilian head proved that instantly. But its back looked to be covered with thick white bristles, or even porpentine quills. As it dipped its head to the lure, Jarnov saw Keme rise and step forward from the jumble of rocks where he had been hidden and let fly an arrow, all in an instant's swift movement. An eye blink later, the Norn arrow dangled from the creature's shoulder, a single black quill among the white. The dragon let out an echoing honk of pain and surprise. Marco now shouted for the rest of them to charge, and without further thought, Jarnov bounded down the slope with the talons. The dragon heard its attackers before it saw them, but it was befuddled to discover enemies on all sides, and in that moment of confusion, Marco reached it and threw his loop of rope over the creature's head. Keme was only a few steps behind, but the thrashing tail struck him and flung him to one side like a chip of wood leaping from an axe blow. Keme somehow staggered to his feet again a few moments later and managed to throw his own noose behind one of the creature's back feet, then waited until the dragon stepped into it before he pulled the cord tight. Nezru had snagged a front leg as it clawed at her, then managed to pull her rope around a huge spike of stone before the worm realized it. From that moment on, the dragon was anchored. Jarnov, aiming for the other hind leg, got the tail instead, but pulled the rope as tight as he could and scrambled backward until he could belay it around a boulder. He threw his weight back against the pull of the creature, which even under restraint was astoundingly strong, and dug in his heels. The dragon bellowed in fury, a strange mixture like a lion's deep roar mingled with a donkey's bray that made Jarnov's ears ache. He could not imagine how they would subdue the creature, even as Gogamgar came clambering down from his high hiding place and leaped up onto the creature's broad back as if to ride it. Even under the giant's weight, the dragon still thrashed and snapped, but as Mako and Keme secured their own ropes, one to a rock, one to a wide stump mostly buried in frozen earth, the flailing white beast had increasingly little room to move. Gogamgar lifted his great axe as if to dash out the dragon's brains, but Mako shouted at him not to harm it. The giant glared back at the chieftain with an expression of disgust that would have amused Jarnov if not for the rope that vibrated in his hands like a stretched bowstring, a rope with a thrashing, jaw-snapping monster at the other end of it. Then suddenly, as if by magic, the dragon's movements slowed and became clumsy rather than desperate. Its pale, blind-looking eyes fell shut as it strained upward against Mako's noose one more time, trying to get its teeth into the mountainous creature on its back. Then it shuddered, stumbled, and collapsed. "Fool of a giant!" Mako snarled. "What were you thinking? I told you a living dragon. We need a living dragon. That is why Kemi shot it with an arrow dipped in precious K-Visha, to steal its wits and put it to sleep." "I would not have hit it so hard as to kill it outright, little Norn," Gogamgar said, rising carefully from the now motionless body, the heavy legs and long claws splayed out across the snow on either side of its trunk. "There would have been time to take blood while it still lived." Mako shook his head. "You understand nothing." But he was breathing so hard that he said no more, only bent and did his best to find his breath. Saumeji, who had never managed to employ his own noose, despite several attempts, now came forward, his rope dragging along the icy slope beside him. The sun had mounted above the eastern rim of the mountains. Jarnov saw a puzzled look twisting the singer's face. "Giant, can you lift the tail?" Gogamgar barked a laugh at the strange request, but reached down and heaved the huge wide tail up so that Saumeji could climb underneath. "Don't let go!" The singer begged.
It is a trifle slippery,
Said the giant, showing his yellow tusks in amusement. So, and there goes the dog alarm. Saumeiji spent a few moments beneath the creature's tail, staring at the base of its belly. This is no he-dragon, he said as he clambered out. Not as shown in any treatise I've seen. This is a female.
So?
Mako helped Keme to his feet. He had collapsed after the dragon had stopped fighting, and clearly, from the way he clutched his ribs, had been injured by the flailing tail.
The mother of the people did not specify male or female, only the blood of a living dragon,
Mako said, then turned to Gogamgar.
Take your great rope, giant, and wrap it fast around the creature, from head to tail. Hurry, or you will feel the sting of the queen's collar, and think the dragon is the lucky one.
Saumeiji shook his head. You do not understand, Hand Chieftain. If this creature is female, it is very young. Scarcely a year old, perhaps less. Jarnov could not get over the size of the thing. 3 or more times the length of a man, and so broad through the body it must weigh somewhere between 20 and 40 hundredweights, as much as 2 long tons. He watched the great ribcage expand and contract with each slow breath, examined claws like curved swords, and thought how lucky they were that the cave Visha had done its job quickly. What do you mean, Singer? Asked Nezaru, who also seemed stunned by the sheer size of the thing they had captured. She crouched at a respectful distance, looking at the finger-sized teeth protruding from the creature's pale jaws. If this is such a young she-dragon, it means it could not be the child of the monster we saw buried in the rock slide, which has plainly been dead for many years. Mako did not even look up, too intent on watching Gogamgar bind the apparently slumbering dragon.
What matter is that? Knot it there, giant, tightly. If it has no room to struggle, it cannot break someone's leg with a twitch.
What matter is that, you say? Saumeiji took a step back, suddenly looking all around. Does no one understand? If this huge creature is not the child of the dead dragon, then it is the child of another. Mako looked up at Saumeiji as it finally came to him.
Another?
A great booming roar rolled down upon them, as if the clouds around the mountain had turned to stone and fallen from the sky. Even the echoes were ear-splitting. Jarnov and the rest looked up at the mountainside in time to see the thing appear head first over a great outcropping, looking like some unbelievably vast serpent, though that was only its head and long, long neck. The rest of the body came into view as the dragon crawled over the rock, its claws digging deep furrows in the raw stone. This beast was white too, wingless like its child, but much, much bigger than the creature lying trussed at their feet. It saw them and opened its toothy maw in a hiss of fury. Saumeiji's voice seemed to come from very far away. The mother is not very happy with us. And then, with a roar that shook the mountainside and echoed from the surrounding peaks, the huge white thing clambered off the rocky outcrop and came scrabbling and let me try that again. And then, with a roar that shook the mountainside and echoed from the surrounding peaks, the huge white thing clambered off the rocky outcrop and came scrabbling and slithering down the slope toward them in a landslide of tumbling stones, fountaining earth, and billowing snow. Chapter 50. Several Matters of State. During a brief pause between audiences with visitors and supplicants, Simon turned to his wife and said, "That was a clever gamble with the escritor, and a lucky one." "What was?" She gave Pasavalis a sign across the heads of the milling courtiers. He nodded and said something to his clerk.
that Oxus would be able to agree to all that by himself, without waiting to hear from the lector. Or were you hoping he wouldn't so you could avoid the wedding? It will probably be an unpleasant affair, with both sides snarling at each other. She shook her head. You are right. I am not looking forward to it. My teeth will be clenched the whole time I'm there. Poor wife. Remember, though, you were the one who decided to face it by yourself and leave me at home. Don't mock me, husband, she told him sternly. I don't mean to. In any case, you've handled the negotiation well. She recognized a peace offering. It seemed obvious that Vidian had to have put a few concessions in the escritor's pocket, or what's the use of sending a high-ranking churchman instead of a letter? The Sansallan Aedonitis has known for a long time that we wanted another northern escritor, so it made sense that the lector would have given permission ahead of time for Oxus to accept any reasonable... Sorry, I just lost my place. There it is. The Sansallan Aedonitis has known for a long time that we wanted another northern escritor, so it made sense that the lector would have given permission ahead of time for Oxus to accept any reasonable candidate. As for the other promise, fairer treatment of all sides by Mother Church, I felt certain Oxus had been told to accept any deal that the lector might be able to slip out of later on. Sweet Elysia, mother of our Redeemer, Simon said, keeping his voice down to avoid being heard by the various courtiers and visitors. Pasquale was now hurrying toward the throne room's great doors. You are more cynical about the church than I am. I love God, but I know the church is composed of mere men. The king laughed, though not entirely happily. Well, I give you all the credit, my dear. You told me Oxus could say yes on the lector's behalf without waiting for an answer, and you were right. It only made sense. Lector Vidian wants the dukedom of Naban to be held by one of his allies, like Count Dallo, but not by violent rebellion, which will bring in the high throne. Now he sees that matters have gone too far, and the lector is desperate to calm things down, and a large part of that is because his own position is shaky. It's his own fault for having so obviously favored the Engadarenes that none of the other families trust him. Simon looked uncertain. But even if Dallo and Drusus reach for power and fail, Lector Vidian cannot be, what would it be called, unelected? See, there isn't even a word for it. Lectors serve for life. You're right, my husband. So he knows that if it came to a civil war in Naban, someone would likely kill him. What do you mean? Not truly. Yes, truly. What do you think happened to the first Lorexes, or old Sequalian? Choked on a fishbone. It is well known in Naban that his mistress poisoned his oyster stew. She paused. In fact, even poor brave Lector Renesson died an unnatural death, and I should know, since I was in the Sansallan that night. But Renesson was killed by Pryrates. It was still a removal for political reasons. Her mouth twisted. My father's reasons, although I pray he did not know how that cursed priest planned to do it. No, my beloved man, power struggles in Naban are nearly always deadly. She showed him a smile, although it came with difficulty. It's a good thing I'm the one going. It's also fitting that I'll be going there on a ship named after my mother, since it was she and my Nabanite relatives who taught me these things. How did your mother teach you all this? She died when you were only a child. And that taught me that life is precarious. But it was her inner court and my relatives there, especially a few rare bitches among her ladies-in-waiting, who taught me how things are done in Naban. Which is all the more reason I should not go back to that treacherous place, though I must, she thought. But I shall miss my kind-hearted husband so painfully while we are apart.
and almost without realizing it, she reached out and took Simon's strong, familiar hand and squeezed it as though she would never let go. "Your visitors have all been sent away," announced Lord Chancellor Passivales. "But Osric, Duke of Falshire and Wentmouth, is waiting, and you will want to see him. He brings news of who shall attend you on your journey, my queen." Mary shared a wordless look of resignation with Simon. Neither of them loved Duke Osric, who was doggedly old-fashioned in his ideas and relentlessly humorless. He also had a tendency to hand all the most valuable plums of his offices to members of his own large, greedy clan. Still, compared to many of the most powerful Erkenlandish nobles, Osric was fairly sensible and hard-working, and he was also Lilia's and Morgan's grandfather, which made him family. "By all means," Simon said with a creditable appearance of cheer. "Usher him in, please." Osric, in company with his clerks as well as half a dozen Erkenguardsmen, strode into the audience room. Thinking about the tangle of Nabanai politics suddenly made Miriamel wonder which way their own Erkenguard would turn if something happened to the king. Her husband was fantastically popular with them, and they liked bluff Constable, Lord Constable Osric as well, but she doubted they felt quite the same about her. Could I hold this kingdom together, my own grandfather's empire, without Simon? Or would they push Morgan onto the throne too early? It was not a pleasant thought. Osric strode to the throne and dropped to a knee, still agile and strong, though he was older than Miri or Simon. The rest of his retinue did the same, eyes firmly fixed on the floor. "Majesties," said the Duke, "may God give you health." "Rise, good Wentmouth," Miri said. "It is good to see you." "And you. But are you certain you must make this journey, Majesty?" Osric asked her. "I fear for your safety, I must confess. Naban is a dangerous place just now." She ignored the squeeze Simon gave her hand. "The journey must be made, but with good, strong Erkenlandish soldiers to protect me, I will feel quite safe. Are all the arrangements made?" "The Princess Hylissa waits, and the boat that will take you to her is ready. All else has been prepared. A long company of the Queen's Erkenguard will accompany you, as well as the women and others of the Queen's household, of course." "And who will command my guard?" she asked. "Chancellor Passivales and I have decided that the knight captain, Sir Jurgen of Sturmstad, will be the best choice." "I know him, but only a little. Is he the dark one?" "He is very dark of hair and beard. Yes, he is of Rimmersgard blood, but his grandfather was Pedruanese, I think," Osric said. "Still, he was born and raised an Erkenlander, and he fought with me at the Imstrecke. A good solid man." "You will have no cause to complain of Sir Jurgen, your Majesties," Passivales said. "He is as devoted as I am to seeing the Queen safely through her visit to Naban." "So it is all accomplished, then?" But as Miriamel said it, she had a sudden swipe of misgiving, a cold reluctance that she had not felt for years. "You leave the day after tomorrow, Majesty. St. Endrian's Day, as you wished. Escritor Oxus and his party will accompany you on the Hylissa, so you will have no lack of company and conversation," Passivales said. Osric bowed again. "And now, my lady, I must leave you and the king to finish the last preparations. I will see you on St. Endrian's." "May I have a few more words with your Majesties about arrangements in Naban?" Passivales asked after Osric was gone. "She will be well guarded, yes?" Simon asked, "and not just by the Duke's men?" "Absolutely, Majesty. The Queen will take many of the Erkenguard with her, some of our best men. Osric has already arranged it." "Then
Am I needed for this discussion? He asked. I have a prior engagement. Mary could see the unhappiness in Simon's long face. What prior engagement could you possibly have? She asked. He looked evasive. Nothing. Nothing important. Just some things to be seen to. Miriam felt sure her husband did not want to hear her making plans for Naban, that it made him sad. Go then, with God's grace, my husband, and do your nothing important. When Simon had gone, Pasiphae said, I did not wish to talk of this in front of the others, excepting the king, of course, but I wanted to give you a name that might prove useful if you find yourself in any difficulty. Difficulty? It came out mockingly, though she had meant it to be light and teasing. In our beloved southern duchy, yours and my dear ancestral home. He could not manage a smile, but he nodded. Please, Majesty, you know as well as I do that Naban is a bear pit covered with pretty ribbons, and matters there, I suspect, are worse than anyone is letting on. She was afraid of just that, but did not show it in her face. And so, Lord Pasiphae? I have already reminded you of Count Froye, our ambassador there, but should you find yourself in a truly bad situation, I want you to remember the name of a friend of mine, a very able and sensible man, Viscount Matreu. Matreu? That sounds like an island name. He is the son of old Count Miletin of Spenit. Matreu's mother came from an old island family, but all that is of little import. Matreu is a good man who has given me much useful information over recent years and has done me more than a few favors. But Spenit is such a long journey from the capital. Matreu lives most of the year in Naban. If you need him, you have only to send a messenger, and he will attend you, I promise. I will remember it, Lord Pasiphae, and my thanks. She looked on him for a moment with real fondness. It is always good to have a secret ally. In Naban, Majesty, you must have as many as you can find, if only to make up for all the secret enemies. She took a sharp breath. You are usually the mildest and most cautious of courtiers and Pasiphae. Do you really think things there are so bad? I saw my family cheated of their land and name, Majesty. A hard edge was in his voice that she had not heard before. I saw my mother humbled and treated like a servant. I left that country with only my shoes and the clothes on my back. His smile was twisted. And that was in better times. Then I hear you, and I am grateful for your concern, she said. I know that those old days were bad ones for you, loyal Pasiphae. We are lucky that your road brought you to us. He bowed. I deserve no credit, my queen. I think only of the high throne. He rose, then kissed her hand. I will pray for your safety every night, Majesty. Pray for Naban, she said. If Naban is preserved, I'm sure I will be too. Next section. She was trying to play jackbones with Adenita and Adenita's sister, Eliweld. But Eliweld was too young and spoiled everything by grabbing the bones when it wasn't even her turn. Stop it, or I'll tell my grandmother on you. Lilia gave Eliweld a little shake, meant only to underline the seriousness of the threat, but Adenita's sister was a blower of the lowest variety and immediately began to shriek as if she'd been slapped. Here! What's this? Countess Rona looked up from her conversation with the queen. Why can't you three play nicely? Lilia hurt me, said Eliweld.
She's a blower, Auntie Roner. Terrible liar. I hardly touched her. Lilia was particularly irritated by the hue and cry because she'd also been listening with interest to the two grown-up women's conversation. Isn't that true, Adenita? Adenita, daughter of a Rousen relative and one of Lilia's most frequent playmates, nodded vigorously. Ellie's a terrible sniveler, Countess. After order was restored, Ellie Weld was given one of Lilia's dolls to play with, and probably to destroy, was Lilia's thought. The two older girls continued with their game of jackbones, and Lilia continued with her eavesdropping. I dread this, I truly do, the Queen was saying. It's hard enough having Morgan so far from home, but now I must leave this little one behind too. Lilia knew that meant her, and although she did not like being called the little one, she was pleased that her grandmother was worrying about her. Auntie Roner laughed. She's like a weed, our Lilia. She'll be fine. And why shouldn't she be here in the hay-holt with me and soldiers and her grandfather, the king? I just worry. The world seems such a dangerous place to me these days. Well, you know what they say, dear Miriamel. I mean, Your Majesty. Heaven is good, but you still shouldn't dance in a small boat. And I think it's true. You shouldn't call down troubles you don't have yet. In Nadglaze we were raised most studiously to avoid such things. Ah, very wise. The Queen sighed loudly, which surprised Lilia, because it seemed more like the sound she herself would make on a boring afternoon or during a punitive banishment to her bedchamber. But it's not just the little one I'm worrying for. It's the king as well. Do you think him apt to get into mischief with you gone? Should I keep an eye on the serving girls? The Queen laughed again. Simon? No, he is more like a boy that way. Not in the marriage bed, where he is lusty enough, but his eye for a pretty woman shames him a bit. He thinks I would take it badly, so he looks away more than he looks at, if you take my meaning. God bless him, but he does not want me angry with him. So what is it you want, dear? What is it that has you worried? Oh, everything. I'm not even certain, my lovely Rona. I suppose I fear that the king, my Simon, will be sad with me gone, that he will be lost, and this is not a time when he can afford to be a mooncalf. The king? A mooncalf? Miriamel smiled. It was slightly grim. You cannot even guess. Don't misunderstand me. Simon is the kindest man I know. But sometimes, I swear with the Sacred Mother as my witness, I feel more like a mother than a wife. Do you know he wanted us to go and eat supper last night on top of Holy Tree Tower? Truly? Why? He wanted to talk about things he'd done when he was a boy, which tower roofs he'd been on, where he'd gotten into different kinds of mischief. I wanted to talk with him instead about what was to come, what he must watch carefully while I'm gone. Many important things. All he wanted to talk about was when we were young. Lilia saw that Auntie Roner was not convinced by what the Queen said. I can think of worse things, Majesty, than a husband who wants to reminisce about the days when you were both young and in love. To be honest, I don't think that I have that much to do with it, Rona. When he was young, he knew me only as somebody he saw a few times from a distance. I knew him better than he knew me. You did? How could that be? Lilia, listening intently now, wanted to ask the same thing. Because I watched him and the other servants. I envied them their freedom. That's an odd word for it. Oh, I know, Rona dear. Don't scold me. By the way, I know it's almost 8 o'clock. I'm just going to find a better place to stop here. Oh, it's a long ways. I'm going to have to just find a place soon. Oh, I know, Rona dear. Don't scold me. We never understand anyone but ourselves when we're young, and we don't understand ourselves very well. But I watched Simon and Jeremias and that page. What was his name? I watched them running around, and even when they were working, they laughed and they sang. She frowned. Isaac, that was his name. Little fellow, but he had a lovely singing voice. Not like Simon's honking. Rona laughed. I stand near your husband in the chapel. I have heard him sing, my lady. And when you say honking, you are very kind. Bless him. And he does love to sing, too. She sighed again. Oh, don't get me wrong, Rona. I will miss him terribly. And he's not a fool, not at all. He will do very well whenever he takes time to think carefully. But I worry that something may happen that compels a sudden choice, and that is when I fear his judgment. I will do my best to watch over all your dear ones, Majesty, her friend said. And don't forget, we will miss you too. And not just the ladies of the court either. All of Erkenland will miss you until you come back to us, my queen. I'll pray every day for your safe journey and speedy return. And yes, I'm going to stop there because there is no good stopping place for a while. So that's where we're going to wrap it up for tonight. I never did check back to make sure everything was working, but I'm assuming that it was Nabani. I mean, in Naban, sorry, Ray Weatherford asked, I thought it was pronounced Nabani. And I assume he's talking about Nabbanai. It's actually Nabani or Nabani. But that's actually, don't worry about it too much, Ray, as I said, because that is one of the ones that, again, predates the rest of the book. So the fact that it's named Naban, I've had to, it doesn't have anything to do with the actual Nabani languages I later kind of cobbled together. So Naban itself is one of those things that comes out of the prehistory of the original trilogy and is not necessarily correct in the first place. So don't worry about it. Pronounce it any darn way you want to. Anyway, so with that question answered, I will say thank you very much for joining me. As always, a huge pleasure to spend some time with you, either on an early Sunday morning or a Sunday evening, which this is. I will be back next week. As I said, I'm still here for a while before we go out of town. So I will be back to read next week, same tad time, same tad channel. I hope you will join me. Until then, take good care of yourselves, your friends and loved ones, and keep an eye out for the people around you who might need a little help or a kind word here and there, because we all do sometimes. And with that, I say peace and good night, and I will talk to you very soon. Okay, bye.